Richard Pryor is remembered as one of the greatest comedians who ever lived. His raw honesty, fearless storytelling, and groundbreaking performances redefined stand-up comedy forever. Generations of comics, from Chris Rock to Dave Chappelle, owe a debt to Pryor, whose influence stretched far beyond the stage. He spoke about race, poverty, addiction, and life with a vulnerability that made people laugh and cry at the same time. When he passed away in December 2005, the world mourned the loss of a legend. Many expected the biggest names in comedy to gather at his funeral, honoring the man who paved the way for them. But when the day came, fans noticed one glaring absence: Eddie Murphy. The man who many consider Pryor's successor, the comedian whose career was shaped by Pryor's influence, did not attend. This absence sparked endless speculation. Why would Eddie Murphy not show up to honor Richard Pryor? Was it due to bad blood, personal reasons, or something deeper? Over time, details have surfaced that paint a more complicated picture, one that reveals not only the relationship between two giants of comedy, but also the weight of grief, legacy, and personal choice. To understand why Eddie Murphy did not attend Pryor's funeral, we first need to understand their relationship. Eddie Murphy burst onto the scene in the early 1980s with his unforgettable run on Saturday Night Live. His charisma, energy, and fearlessness immediately drew comparisons to Pryor. In fact, Murphy himself openly credited Pryor as one of his biggest influences. He studied Pryor's timing, delivery, and ability to turn painful truths into brilliant comedy. In interviews, Murphy often said that without Richard Pryor, there would be no Eddie Murphy. His own stand-up specials, like Delirious and Raw, were built on Pryor's foundation of edgy, unfiltered storytelling. Murphy pushed boundaries, but he never denied who showed him the path. To many fans, their bond was not just about comedy, it was about passing the torch. Pryor had shattered the ceiling, and Murphy soared through it. But their relationship was not always smooth. Pryor, known for his sharp tongue, sometimes voiced frustration about the younger comedians who followed in his footsteps. Fame had made him wary, and his health struggles later in life deepened his sensitivity. Rumors circulated that Pryor and Murphy had disagreements, particularly when Pryor's star began to fade as Murphy's skyrocketed. There were also stories of tension on the set of Harlem Nights, 1989, the only film the two starred in together. The movie, which Murphy directed, was highly anticipated, but failed to live up to expectations. Some reports claimed that Pryor resented Murphy's control over the project. Others suggested that Pryor's declining health and struggles with multiple sclerosis limited his ability to perform at his peak, leaving him frustrated. Still, despite any tension, Murphy continued to speak of Pryor with respect. He acknowledged him as a mentor and inspiration, calling him the boldest comedian ever. Their connection was complicated, but it was undeniably significant. When Richard Pryor died on December 10, 2005, from a heart attack at the age of 65, tributes poured in from around the world. Comedians, actors, and fans shared memories, quotes, and gratitude for the man who changed comedy forever. His funeral, held in Los Angeles, was a chance for friends and admirers to say goodbye. But Eddie Murphy was not there. The absence of someone so closely tied to Pryor's legacy raised eyebrows. Fans began asking questions. Some speculated it was due to a rift. Others wondered if Murphy had his own private reasons. Eventually, explanations began to emerge. One of the main reasons Murphy did not attend was deeply personal grief. In an interview years later, Murphy revealed that Pryor's death hit him hard. He explained that Pryor was not just another comedian, he was his idol. To Murphy, going to the funeral would have been too painful, too overwhelming. He said that he preferred to remember Pryor in his own way, holding on to the inspiration and joy that Pryor had given him, rather than confronting the finality of death. Murphy's absence was not about disrespect. It was about protecting himself from emotional devastation. He explained that seeing Pryor laid to rest would have been unbearable, and he chose instead to honor him privately. This choice reflects something many people understand but rarely discuss. Funerals are meant for closure, but for some, they bring more pain than peace. For Murphy, attending would not have been healing, it would have been haunting. By staying away, he could preserve his memory of Pryor as alive, vibrant, and iconic, rather than as someone who was gone. In fact, Murphy later spoke warmly about Pryor's legacy. He described him as the true pioneer of modern stand-up, someone who had taken comedy into uncharted territory. He said Pryor's bravery allowed him and others to succeed, and he never downplayed that influence. Murphy's words showed reverence and gratitude, even if his actions confused fans at the time. Another factor may have been the complicated history between the two. While Murphy admired Pryor, Pryor was known to have mixed feelings about Murphy's success. Some insiders claimed that Pryor once accused Murphy of borrowing too heavily from his style. Others suggested Pryor felt overshadowed by the younger star's fame in the 1980s. By the time of Pryor's death, however, these tensions were largely in the past. Still, Murphy may have felt that attending the funeral could reignite speculation about their relationship. By staying away, he avoided becoming part of the narrative and allowed the focus to remain on Pryor's legacy. There is also the possibility of privacy. Eddie Murphy has long been known as someone who fiercely guards his personal life. Unlike other celebrities, he avoids unnecessary public appearances, especially when it comes to sensitive matters. Attending Pryor's funeral would have meant facing the cameras, the questions, and the endless analysis. For Murphy, who wanted to grieve quietly, that was not an option. He may have felt that showing up would turn the event into a media circus, with photographers more focused on him than on Pryor. In that sense, his absence could be seen as an act of respect, allowing the spotlight to remain where it belonged, on Richard Pryor. At this point, let us pause and reflect. How often do we expect celebrities to grieve the way we want them to? How often do we demand public displays of mourning, forgetting that they too are human? Murphy's decision challenges that expectation. It reminds us that grief is personal. No one owes the world their presence at a funeral, no matter how famous they are. The story of Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor's funeral is also about legacy. Pryor was the trailblazer, Murphy the torchbearer. Their careers were linked in ways that made Murphy's absence at the funeral more noticeable. But legacies are not defined by funerals. They are defined by words, actions, and the respect shown over a lifetime. Murphy has never wavered in his praise for Pryor. He has called him the single most important influence in his comedy. He has reminded audiences, time and again, that Pryor was the one who made it possible for a black comedian to dominate mainstream entertainment without compromise. And in the years since Pryor's passing, Murphy has carried that torch with humility. His continued acknowledgement of Pryor ensures that the legend lives on. Interestingly, Murphy is not the only celebrity to have skipped a major funeral. Many stars, from Marlon Brando to Frank Sinatra, chose not to attend public memorials for people they loved. Sometimes, the pain is too deep. Sometimes, the spectacle of media coverage overshadows the intimacy of saying goodbye. In Murphy's case, his choice aligns with a long tradition of private mourning. For fans, the absence was noticeable, but it did not erase the bond between the two comedians. When people look back, they remember the way Pryor inspired Murphy, the way Murphy acknowledged that debt, and the way both men shaped comedy in their own eras. Pryor opened the door, and Murphy walked through it, creating his own legendary path. The truth is, Murphy did not need to be at the funeral to prove his love for Richard Pryor. His career, his tributes, and his constant acknowledgement of Pryor's greatness speak louder than his physical presence ever could. In the end, Eddie Murphy's decision not to attend Richard Pryor's funeral was not about disrespect, rivalry, or neglect. It was about grief, privacy, and personal choice. For Murphy, the pain of saying goodbye publicly was too heavy. For him, honoring Pryor privately was the best way to keep his memory alive. What matters most is not where Murphy was on that day in 2005. It is how he has carried Pryor's legacy forward in the nearly 2 decades since. Every time Murphy steps on stage, every time he acknowledges Pryor as the pioneer, he pays tribute. And in that sense, Richard Pryor's influence is not buried. It lives on. So when fans ask why Eddie Murphy did not go to Richard Pryor's funeral, the answer is simple and complex at the same time. He stayed away because the grief was too deep, because the circus of publicity would have been too much, and because sometimes the best way to honor someone is to remember them as they were, not as they are in death. For Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor will always be alive in his work, his heart, and his memory. And maybe, just maybe, that is the truest tribute of all.